This is Lynn bowing in. Well, I certainly feel relaxed and my speech slower after hearing that beautiful music. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce Dharma teacher Trish Thompson. But before I turn the Zoom over to her, I would like to share just a few things about her for those of you who may not know. Trish was first introduced to mindfulness 34 years ago. In 1996, Trish spent 6 months in India. 3 of those months were at Donmaling Nunnery, and she was the first Westerner to spend time there. Have I been on mute the whole time? No, okay. All right. Trish stayed with the Dalai Lama's brother and sister-in-law and had a private audience with the Dalai Lama. And while she was in India, she also had the opportunity to personally meet Mother Teresa. In 1997, she attended her first retreat with Thich Nhat Hanh in Key West. And that was that. In 2005, she accompanied Thai on his triumphant return to Vietnam after being exiled for 39 years. They went on a 3-month teaching tour with other monastics and lay people. And at the end of that time, Trish decided that she wanted to stay and live in Vietnam, building Sangha. In 2011, she received the lamp transmission from Thai and became a Dharma teacher. In 2013, she founded the Loving Work Foundation. And I'll just read to you our mission in her words. The Loving Work Foundation was founded as a means to inspire personal interest in the cultural vibrancy, the spiritual practices, and everyday lives of the people of Vietnam. We do this by supporting humanitarian programs that improve the lives of disadvantaged Vietnamese children and families, and by organizing and leading mindfulness retreats within the country, providing friends around the world the opportunity to practice together in the spirit of global community building and engaged service. Trish is the lay Dharma teacher for Singapore and Malaysia and has organized retreats in many different places and given talks all over the world. Trish is an inspiration, mentor, and teacher, and friend to many all over the world. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to you my teacher and my friend, Trish Thompson. Lynn bowing out.
Dear respected Thai, dear Sangha, listening to that, what occurred to me was maybe we should add that Trish is the Forrest Gump of this practice, because that's the way all those things that Lynn said about me, which are true, of course, but that's sort of the way all of that happened. It's not exactly the way I had thought I might start this talk, but it's true that I realize I have never been looking for anything. Nothing about my life has ever felt that I was looking for something. And yet, it feels like I found everything. If I draw my last breath today, I'm happy, and content to call it a life. Also, listening to the music, thank you, Tony, for that lovely guidance. I haven't heard that kind of music in a very long time, since maybe the early 90s. So most of you, some of you I know pretty well, and you know me, but others of you, I'm new to you, and you haven't heard me give any talks. But it seems that everything in my life always goes back to mother, because that was the beginning of my path of awakening. I think I've always been on a path. I believe that we're all on a path, whether we know it or not. Some kind of path that's taking us to something. And for me, it was the passing away of my mother. But that comes up. I hadn't planned to talk about that at all, and I'm not exactly, except to say that that took me to grief support. And again, I wasn't looking for it. A friend came and almost literally took me by the hand and took me to a psychotherapist for grief support, which became 10 years of healing the inner child, family of origin therapy. And so what began as grief support evolved into learning ways to know myself, and by knowing myself, to know you. And that music was often played in circles that I was in those first few years. 1989 was the passing away of my mother. And so in 1989, 1990, 1991, in particular, my root guru, Thai, says that the person who births you spiritually is your root guru. And for me, she was Judy Johnson, psychotherapist, wise woman. And she would often, or sometimes, play that music. And she didn't call it deep relaxation. She didn't call it meditation. She would just say, all right, we're all going to lie down on the floor now, and I'm going to play some music for you. And it would be that kind of music, which I had the word for it. For me, it sounded celestial, and it still does. Celestial, cosmic. And I would, the seed of grief in me, of sorrow, of sadness, would be deeply touched, and I would just sob like a baby. So now today, Tony plays that music. Tony also spoke about eating meditation, and that took me to 1997, my first retreat with Ty, a week in Key West, Florida. That was my first experience with eating meditation, of eating in a small family where everyone was sitting quietly, eating mindfully, smiling at one another. It was the happiest week of my life, and the eating part of it was a huge part because I had grown up in a family of 4 siblings, much older than I. There were husbands and wives and their children and my parents, and we would be at the dinner table when they all came home in particular, and it would be rather chaotic, and I would get a stomach ache, or it would be well, it was never mindful speech, everyone talking over each other and talking at once, and sometimes arguing, or even sometimes when I was home alone, just with my mother and father, there would be arguments that would come up at the dinner table, or just tension, angry tension, and I would have a stomach ache. So to this day, I most enjoy silence at mealtime, or very little conversation. I don't really enjoy having background music while I'm eating. I like to focus on the food and whatever's going on right around me. Otherwise, I can get a stomach ache, just too much stimulation for me. And then today, there's our sister with her baby, and that took me to how the first 6 months or so of after my mother passed away, I really was a baby. I just cried. I would go every Thursday evening to group therapy, and while others shared in the circle, I would be in a corner crying, very often under a blanket. I would pull a blanket over me and just curl up in a ball in a corner of the room and cry. And then gradually, I learned to come out from under the blanket. So maybe I became a toddler. And so it's really, we hear born again in Christian circles, but that's really what it was for me too. I was born again. I started as an infant, one who was suffering from abandonment. Where had my mother gone? Where are you, Mama? You were here 1 second and then you were gone. Where were you? And you didn't take me with you. You always took me with you. I grew up in a time when we didn't have babysitters, and I grew up in a small town, South Carolina, and you went with your parents. I happened to not have partying parents. They weren't, maybe it would have been different had they been at the country club or something on a Saturday night. I'm sure I wouldn't have gone with them then, but they didn't have that kind of life. They were farmers, and they lived a very simple life. And wherever my mother went, I went until, And of course, I had married. I was 47 years old when my mother passed away. So a lot had happened, and I had no idea how attached I was and how difficult it would be to come through all of that. But I'm so, so grateful. But none of that is actually the topic of the talk today. Zach had asked me for a topic, of course. And without really giving it much thought, I actually realized that I am challenged always to come up with a topic, with a name, a label, because I realize that whatever's going to happen is what's going to happen, no matter what I might have said a month ago. It might be entirely different today, and it almost always is. But I gave the topic, if you'll recall, presence as refuge. So then, when I started thinking about this today and reflecting on it this week, that I would be coming to Phoenix on Friday evening and having this half day of mindfulness with you today. And so, what did I mean? Why did I come up with that one? Well, I've been in the U.S. since June 2nd. Came from Vietnam, and I've been around a number of people who don't practice, who the conditions just have not become sufficient yet for them to meet a practice, or it's just not their path, or whatever. And I've been around more news than I often am when I'm back in Asia. I watch the news. I mean, I look at it, I read it on my computer, wherever I am. I like to stay in touch. I feel I need to know what is going on in the world. I'm not hiding from it. Also, I have confidence in myself, in my practice, that I can handle it. And so I'm not trying to avoid the news. But I also recognize and totally understand that there are people, many people, who are not ready, just as I wasn't ready to know that mothers die. There are many people who cannot watch the news. It creates too much anxiety. They don't have the inner resources, don't have a practice yet, or maybe they do, but it isn't strong enough. They just haven't met the conditions yet to be strong enough inside, stable enough. The stability is there, but they haven't gotten in touch with it yet, to allow the reality of the day, whatever it is, to enter their consciousness. But I am not one of those people, and thanks to everything that's happened in my life. So I feel I'm keenly aware without falling into a state of depression about it. And in fact, I realize it's an amazing time to be alive. It's an absolutely amazing time to be walking on the planet. With all of the challenges that we have, with climate emergency, overpopulation, so many people, so many refugees on the planet, millions and millions, 60 million 10 or 12 years ago, I don't know what the numbers are today, of people who have been felt they had to leave their homes, either pushed out or chose to leave because they couldn't tolerate being there anymore. It wasn't safe enough. So people looking for some place, some safe place. And so what I understand about how the world works is that all of our experience of what is happening in the world is really a reflection of what is happening inside of me, inside of us. And that is where we do the major work to contribute to the healing and transformation of the planet. So if we want to help the earth, and by that we mean all life on the earth, then we do our inner work. You know, that's not to say that some of us are not or don't become very active, whether it's social activism or whether we become activists for social justice or climate justice or whatever the issue is that touches our hearts and creates some sort of energy that says, yes, this is what I'm interested in, and I have the energy for this, and I want to contribute in this way. There are those of us who are like that, and then there are those of us who continue to more or less stay in the temple on the cushion and work with our individual healing, staying focused on our inner world and what is going on there and what has gone on there. What are the roots of the suffering or discontent? I heard a number of people say today they were feeling contented. I had an inward smile when I heard that, because I often use that word too. I find that I often feel content. No, not particularly joyful. I don't know, maybe yes, I guess I feel happy. I don't know, I just feel content. I'm just okay with things as they are. And that has been, for me, a wonderful place to arrive at, to realize that I am living my life in a contented way. So what I've become aware of since being in the U.S. is the degree of fear and anxiety, anger. I learned in therapy years ago that anger, the energy of anger, is almost always protecting the energy of grief and sadness, sorrow, disappointment. So I've learned that for myself. I've had experiences where I felt the energy of anger and sometimes put it out there, only to then sit back and realize, oh, I spoke in anger, but actually I feel like crying because actually I feel sad. So it's interesting how we protect our most vulnerable self sometimes, our most vulnerable situation, by projecting anger into the world. So of course mindfulness is a medicine for that. So I've become aware that there's a lot of anxiety and fear of what ifs. You know, what if the well runs dry? What if the river dries up? What if the storm is so much bigger this year than in former years? What if the rivers overflow? What is flash flood anyway? What is that? What happens in a flash flood? So I was just, I mentioned that I came to Phoenix last evening from the East Coast. My daughter lives in Charleston, South Carolina, and we made a road trip. We love to make road trips because we have that freedom to, if we want to pull over and stop there or go over there, or we don't have a schedule, we don't have a plan. And but we had somewhat of one. So as is so often with plans, it didn't turn out the way we thought it would. We had a plan to go to Vermont. And a Sangha brother, one who comes to Vietnam every year on retreat with us, he had offered their cottage in Vermont. They were not going to be there. So we were all happy about that. We'll stay in Vermont, we'll make that a home base, and then we'll just explore Vermont and maybe New Hampshire. Maybe we'll drive over to Maine. We got as far as Washington, D.C., where we had planned to visit a friend for a couple of days, and the huge, I don't know, you might have read it, storms hit Vermont, heavy rains. So they had a lot of flash floods, a lot of flooding all over the state. So we did not go to Vermont. But all that brought up a lot of concern. So, that happened to them. That happened to that family driving on a road. And all of a sudden, here came a flash flood, and they were swept away. This was in eastern Pennsylvania a couple of weeks ago. So you know these things are happening, you read these things, and it's very challenging, I think, not to fall into fear about that. What if that happens, what would we do if that happened to my family? I mean, that was just a young family who on holiday, going to a birthday party, driving along a country road in eastern Pennsylvania, and out of nowhere, totally unexpected, came a flash flood, a wave of water. So sudden they couldn't get out of their cars. So of course that waters our seeds of fear, concern, how to prepare for something like that. Well, of course we can do things like decide that we won't live in Vermont. We can do things like decide that, well, it's getting hotter in the west, so maybe we'll think about buying land in the east, if we're fortunate enough to be the people who can have that mobility. But all of that is something outside, and not to say that that might not be a good plan and a good plan to execute, but I personally am convinced that the deeper work is the work that we cannot afford to ignore or neglect, and that is our own inner work, and to realize that the more stable I can be, the more confidence I can have in myself, the more capacity I have to be present as a refuge, to be present in a moment where there's a storm or a flash flood or an emotional storm, an argument, some violence around, whatever the situation might be. The more present I can stay in that moment, the more stability I can really feel, the more I can go to that island within oneself, because that's what it is, an island of, it's the Buddha. So the Buddha is not in that statue. That's just a piece of wood behind me. The Buddha is here. So the Buddha is mindfulness. So the moment that I am aware, the Buddha is there. So Buddha is awareness. And we talk about the Dharma, if we study more of the Dharma, if we practice more of the Dharma. Do I have time to do that? Oh, I have a busy life. I don't have enough time really for the practice. So I'm already beginning to think of it as something external to me that I bring into my life sometime and then I push it away sometime. It's not like that at all. The Buddha is here, just waiting for us to come back to the breath. The breath is the Dharma. So I take refuge in that island in myself. So the more, the safer I can feel, the more present I can be when under duress, then of course, the more likely I am to make the choice that is the wisest choice for the moment. So I'm not taken off guard. I don't lose my balance. I don't get lost in the turmoil or whatever it might be. So we are responsible, each of us. Each of us. We are each responsible for our own healing and transforming. But of course, here we are in a Sangha, here we are in a community. We've met the conditions to meet other like-minded people, to find a path, to find all these wonderful practices that have been created for us, to help us to get control of this mind that's in the body. And my own personal experience has been that for me, again, I loved that guided meditation because the music brought me right back into my body. Of course, I was aware of my thoughts, but I was feeling my whole body and realizing that, yes, those were the first practices that I was introduced to, were body practices to help me get in touch with the body, because that's where the mind is. That is the mind. The body is the mind. The mind is the body. So there are many teachers who will tell us, listen to the body. It'll tell you what you need to know. So another way to think of it is, the intuition. My intuition will let me know what to do, what to say, what not to do, what not to say in any given moment. So as I practice, I'm creating more confidence in myself, more stability in myself, and I don't have to go through life then being concerned about what's going to happen next year. I take care of this moment, this morning, this time, because this is the future. Next year on this date will be this. So there's no separation between the past, the present, and the future. You have to sort of reflect on that if you haven't already, to understand how that works. But it doesn't really do much good to sit around and talk about the what-ifs. I think almost always if a sentence begins with what if, it's fear-based. It's coming from fear. That's not helpful to anyone. So the challenge is to stay present. That's where we take refuge. So that word refuge already implies, to me anyway, that I'm feeling a need to get away from something, protect myself from something, whether it's physical or whether it's a toxic environment, whether it's an emotional relationship that's unhealthy, whether it's a need to lick my wounds, you know, animals lick their wounds. I did that 22 years ago, 23 years ago. I left a marriage, and I knew I needed a refuge. And I'd actually had been given the wise counsel of one of our most senior nuns in Plum Village, who said to me, you know, we see that you love the practice. We see that you are really practicing. I was going to retreats. I was in love. I was one of those people that Thai says falls in love with the Dharma, which is another way of saying I fell in love with life, with being alive, with being in the moment, of being aware of what was going on instead of sleepwalking through life, which is what I had done for 40-some years. But he was not. And she said, I know that you think that you are helping him by staying, but you're not. You are contributing to his negative karma. He's not happy either. She said, I'm not suggesting divorce. I don't know anything about that. But you need a refuge. She said, go to Maine. She knew that we had a little cottage in Maine. Go to Maine, plant a garden, nurture yourself. So I did that. So I went to a little cottage in the woods, a mile from a little lobster fishing village, and where I knew no one. And I lived for a year alone there through one of the worst winters, because I'm a Southern girl. I didn't know anything about harsh winters. And I spent a lot of time on my knees. I would just fall down on my knees and say, yeah, what am I supposed to be doing? Just, what can I do? Why am I here? What's happening? Just really surrendering, I didn't have to try. I felt that so deeply. Why am I here alone? And yet I was. But it was exactly what I needed, you know. Except for that time in the nunnery in India, where I had a room to myself, of course. That was the first time that I'd ever lived alone, just for those 3 months, because I had gotten married. My first marriage, I had 2 long marriages, 19-year marriages, 2 24-year active relationships that never end, of course. Even with death, they don't end. So I married the first time right after high school. I was 17 years old, so I went from my parents to my children's father, to my husband, who became my children's father. And then I had my children with me for the 11 years that I lived not alone, but without a partner. But I wasn't living alone because I had my children. Then I remarried. So when I went to India, of course I had, I worked, and I would sometimes be on this or that trip for work and would be in a hotel by myself. But I'm talking about where you don't have a structure. There's no one telling you you have to get up at a certain time or go to bed at a certain time. So for the first time in my life, there I was with 3 months of not answering to anyone, no one asking me to do anything. I could do what I wanted. My schedule could be whatever I wanted it to be. Wow, what a crazy feeling that was. And plus, to be 10,000 miles from anybody I knew, it was pretty life-changing, for sure. But when I went to Maine in 2001, I was up there during the winter of 2001. That was the first time I had, had a kitchen and pots and pans and dishes and cooking for myself and no one else to cook for. And I noticed that all my bowls and my pots were large. They were for a family. They were always for people around me. And then there I was alone. I had moments of real despair, sometimes days. My body would really let me know that. And I'd go for massage therapy. I'm an absolute believer in body work. Massage therapy is the finest form of meditation. And then I had moments of absolute joy, of realizing I am right where I want to be. I remember one night we were having what they call a nor'easter in Maine. So the storm coming from the northeast was in January. And there I am in this little cottage, lost the power. The only heat I had was a wood-burning stove. And the wind was howling and the snow was coming down. And I had to trudge through the snow to go to the garage to get more wood. And I pulled the mattress off of a little day bed and put it in front of the wood-burning stove. It was a Friday night. I sat there and I'm looking at the fire. It was absolute magic. And I had the thought, everyone I know, now I'm talking about people from my former community of people who had not begun to wake up at all. Everyone I know is at a party tonight, Friday night. You know, they're with friends, they're out to dinner or something like that. They're socializing. And here I am sitting in Maine on a mattress on the floor in front of a wood-burning stove, and I burst out laughing. And I don't know, I think I even said it aloud, I'm happy. I was happy to be right there. So those are some of the memories that come up today about what my path has been and how it has evolved. It's all been evolving. So, yeah, the Forrest Gump. That just occurred to me when I was listening to Lynn. So I thought, wow, that sounds like somebody else she's talking about, but I know it's true. All those things happened. And in sort of miraculous ways. You know, everything unexpected, nothing planned, just evolved. No reservations, you know, nothing. Just bought an airplane ticket to India and it all unfolded. So I invite you to consider some of what I've said. I hope it might mean something to you on your path. To realize that we don't have to go anywhere. We don't have to go to India. We don't have to go to a cottage in the woods to develop that practice of coming back to the center, coming home, taking refuge in the island in oneself. We all have that. Buddha is there. It's nothing outside. It's all here. Climate emergency is all here. We're projecting all of that. It's a reflection of our own ill-being. Yeah. And when I say our, I don't necessarily mean you or you or you or this group, because I know we're all doing our best to wake up and stay awake and know the best way to go forward, to protect ourselves and our families and our planet and to thrive. But we also know we have billions on the planet who have not met any of these conditions. I heard Ty giving, I attended Ty's last English-speaking retreat in 2014 in Plum Village, and he talked a lot about the title of it was What Happens When We Die, and then he renamed it, well, what's happening now? And that was the subtitle. What's going on now? Yeah. Maybe we don't spend so much time on what happens after death. Let's focus on here and now. This is where we are right now. That'll take care of itself. Mm. But he talked a lot about the sixth extinction, and that we're in it, and it's not like it hasn't happened before, 5 other times. And he said, you know, we just, human beings, we haven't been able to go very far, it appears. It appears. He didn't say anything as though it was or I didn't hear it, as a certainty. Because he also, Ty has also always said, we can't lose hope. We never want to lose hope. That's just absolutely the worst, if we lose hope. Mm-hmm. But then I think my question would be, hope for what? What am I putting my hope into? What am I hoping for? For me, I'm hoping that we wake up. And I see that it's happening. Don't you see it around you? More and more people using some of the same language that you use. Don't you see it, hear it around you? More and more people coming together in community, helping one another. They certainly did it in Vermont. There was so much written about that during the recent floods, how the people came together to help one another. So my root guru used to say, we don't get up and walk across the room unless we have to. Why would we? Why would you just get out of your chair and walk across the room? So we are being forced. We're being forced to wake up. So our contribution, our real contribution needs to be, I think, for me it is anyway, to do this inner work. And then perhaps I have the energy to get out there and do something else, to do something that's out there. You know, whether it's lead a peace march or get involved in giving a talk to the county council about whatever's going on in your community that needs some improvement, whatever it is. So for me, our, you know, Ty says it really isn't correct to say I or my. It's we and our, because we enter our with everyone and everything. So I'm not this I over here, this separate person. So we, with the Loving Work Foundation, we involve ourselves in improving the lives of families and children in Vietnam. Nothing I ever thought when I was growing up in Varnville, South Carolina, a little town of 700, that I would be doing. So life just took me like that. There I am doing that work. So that's my little contribution. It's a big one, actually, for those involved. It's a very big one. It makes a huge difference in the lives of the people who do the service work, some of whom are on this today. I'm looking at your Monica and Barb and Susan and Heather and Lynn and and David Black, Dana Lee, Sandy. They've all been to Vietnam. Yeah, they've all been a part of that. And I'm sure that they would tell you that it was life-changing for them, just as it has been for me, just as it has for those people that we serve. So I'm going to be quiet. I've talked maybe longer than I was supposed to, I don't know. But I really, really enjoy and encourage you to be involved in a Q&A. That way we can get real specific about what is in your hearts and on your minds. And, you know, Ty has always encouraged us when we ask a question to realize that we're asking it for the whole group, really. So when we ask a question, we become the spokesperson for the group, because somehow we're picking up on the energy in the group. So we're co-creating the question, and together we'll co-create the answer. So I'll bow out for now and wait for the questions. Thank you.